Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from around the planet. And for the first time in many, many weeks, it looks like we have absolutely no viewers, which is fun. But never mind. I'm sure they will turn up, and I'm sure you'll be watching this back over the next. It must be because it's Christmas. We've got one viewer. Hello. Excellent.
Yeah, it's
Hopefully we get
exciting.
some more turn up as we go as well. Because today we will be diving into a very deep and more sort of a discussion-led creation conversations, a proper creation conversation, if you like, but obviously dealing around the general topic of Christmas, but looking into specific things about stars and wise men and meteorites. And I've even got some dinosaur eggs down here by special request of John Mackay, so we'll see how dinosaur eggs fit into Christmas as well. But it's great to have you guys watching with us. It's great for everybody to be here. And Diane, John, Sam, we're all here. No Craig this time, who's unfortunately had to rush and sort some stuff out. So it's just the four of us today. But Sam, you're jumping out quite early, I understand.
Yes, unfortunately, it is the nature of the festivities. I have wrapping to do and a house to tidy for my wonderful parents who are coming to visit me for the holidays. So unfortunately, needs must. But I'm here for the first half an hour or so. So don't worry, I will take good care of you in the chat.
Great stuff. All right. Well, it's great to have you two here as well, John and Diane, the resident Australians for today. How's it going where you are? What have you been up to, Diane?
I've been cold, actually. It's supposedly summer here.
I know. Tell me about it. It's pretty cold. Yeah. It's 3 degrees in the building at the moment. Unfortunately, with it being such a big building.
I'm warmer than that.
I was going to say, with the Creation Research Centre being such a big building, it takes several hours to actually heat itself up. So to try and save money, we've been trying to just put it on when I need it, but it means that I have to sit here in the cold for ages. So please send more money so he can actually warm the place properly, which would be wonderful.
Yes, having been there, I quite understand how
well, we had the opposite in the summer when we were trying to move stuff in. It just got so hot. There's very little ventilation at the minute as well. So we need aircon, we need heating, we need something. But anyway, you're doing well anyway in Australia.
Yes, thanks. Yes.
Good. How are you doing, John?
Well, I'm doing exceptionally well. As you can see, T-shirt, and it's just glorious at this time of day. It's Saturday morning over here. We're ahead of you Brits as usual. But when you look at the weather, it's great out here. But as Diane said, it's very cold in Canberra. But there was a news item the other day about how hot it was in Western Australia. And, of course, that overlaps on looking up. It got me inspired to say, well, what's the temperature been like at Christmas through the years? And you find back in the 1880s, we had a similar situation where it was really warm in Perth and it was snowing in Canberra and the snowy mountains, etc. So there is nothing new under the sun. And climate change is a short-term, very blind-sided view of the real records of history. So first point, you want to study Christmas, then make sure you study the real history, not just the history of the climate, but the history recorded in the Bible. So that's what we've been looking at as we've been preparing for tonight's program. And a good reminder that this is sort of like a little introduction to what we're doing next week. Correct, Joe? What are we doing next week?
It is indeed. In fact, I think we might even have a graphic about it still up here somewhere, Sam, if you can find that. We will be on Standing for Truth. Our good friends Donnie over at Standing for Truth, we will be on his program. There it is there. The Creator came for Christmas. Jesus in Genesis to Jesus in John. So it's going to have certainly me and John on there. We're going to have a great time running through some of the details. It's great because oftentimes on Standing for Truth, we deal with the science, we deal with the geology, we deal with the biology, we deal with race and all sorts of stuff like that. Whereas this program, we're sort of scaling it back a little bit, and we're actually trying to delve into, well, you could call it more of the theological point, but really overall it's understanding who Jesus Christ is, the complete Jesus Christ, if you like. So not just him as our savior, which of course he is, but also looking at him as our creator, our sustainer, our savior, and our coming king. So it really is going from beginning to end. It's a fascinating Bible study, and as he said, we're sort of practice running it here. I mean, there's a lot more here than we'll really have time to get through full stop, because it's a huge topic, as you might imagine. But it'll be good. We're going to do more of a sort of a discussion style special today, but I'm sure that there'll be plenty that we can talk about going through. So great stuff.
Yes, I'll be part of that as well.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things I've got in front of me now, I have a bottle of it's one of these sort of fragrances, you know. It to me, it smells a bit like some of our Outback tea tree combined with a bit of gum mixture, but it's actually got written on the outside, Joe, frankincense. Now, has that got anything to do with Christmas?
Well, I think it might have. This is probably one of the more famous sides. In fact, I think actually what I got from our good friend Jim, who you know, John, a little while back, was a couple of fragrance bottles, one of frankincense like yours, one of myrrh, and then a tiny little fleck on a bit of quartz of Australian gold. So I think the three of those have something to do with it as well.
You pay one of the flecks of gold for this because there's $100 worth of frankincense in there.
Wow.
And I was doing some research for my wife, as many of you know, has not been well. And a supporter sent this in and said, try this, because they sort of touched on the edge of aromatherapy, one of those controversial sort of areas. So I looked up Johns Hopkins University. And, the medical department, quite a famous department. And I was pleasantly surprised to tell you and to find out myself, they recommended certain of these oils as being far better than our medicines for actually getting rid of certain bacteria and things like that. And I thought, wow, that's something I never knew. But then I did know that most of our medicines were derived from things like this in the beginning, right? So there's obviously an overlap. But what's frankincense famous for, Joe?
Is one of the gifts that the wise men or magi brought Jesus when he was born.
Well, a tougher question. What does the word frankincense mean?
Ooh, now that's going to beat me slightly. I'm sure I would have known at one point. I know where it comes from, but...
All right, so when you look at it, because I deliberately went and re-looked it up,
yeah.
I actually prepared a Christmas program for a church that had been a supporter, and they wanted to deal with the big picture of Christmas, because Christmas often is just a babe in a manger. And I went to a church last week, and I love this church and they love us, but they had what most churches have. They had the baby in the manger, they had Mary and Joseph, they had a couple of sheep, and then they had the three wise men around, one of whom at least carried the frankincense. Now, as to the validity of that picture like that, we'll discuss that a little later. But one of the things I was reminded of was that frankincense is actually named after the Franks. It's the incense that the Franks liked and sold, and Franks named it, Franks, French, the Germans, right? Germanic tribes, they liked this stuff, and their word for frank, now look, I know Australians are humble, but the frank means excellent, superior. So frankincense, in their mind, was the best incense you could ever have. So they named it after themselves, and the others named it because that's the only place you could buy it. Good Germanic traders. So it's an interesting bit of history, and we often forget where some of these names come from. And as you've heard me over the years, names matter. Origins matter. Where something comes from tells you what it means. What it means tells you what it's worth. What it's worth tells you what you can do with it. And this whole program will be about that.
Great stuff. That's fantastic. Right. Well, let's dive into our sort of ministry update and stuff that we've always do, letting you know what's going on in the world of creation research before we delve into our main discussions. And we've got like a whole string of questions and discussion points that John and Diane and myself have sort of pulled together over the last little while. So we'll run down through some of those. But before we do, let's dive into our ministry updates and what's been going on. Diane, would you like to give us a start by giving us your background to Christmas in Australia, as I think your title is put down in your PowerPoint?
Yes, I've got a funny story. Christmas is supposed to be a time of joy, so I've got a funny story about some Australian Christmas carols. Now, I remember singing Australian Christmas carols in the school choir. I won't tell you how many years ago that was. And And I thought, oh, well, I'll look some of these up. So I just went to do a Google search, and I actually put into the search Australian Christmas carols. And I didn't say songs. I actually did Australian Christmas carols. And can you imagine what came up? On the top of the Google search, if I can get... oh, dear. Come on. My computer is being a pain here. I can't get my... yes, there we go. Right. What came up on the top of my Google search? This article here from The Guardian. And it's from last year's Christmas. And entitled Australian Christmas Songs Ranked by How Baffling They Are to Literally Everyone Else. And the writer of this article wrote, it wouldn't be an Aussie Christmas without sun, prawns and native birds, perhaps too many native birds. And he went on to say, I don't know what it is about our national psyche that urges us to remake Christmas carols that are hyper-specific to our nation. But it probably has to do with climate dysphoria. Interesting terminology there. And climate dysphoria is when almost every Yuletide song mentions the snow, the fireplace, the warm eggnog, and Santa getting frostbite. Now, I can certainly attest to that. If you go to the shopping centres these days, it can be 90 degrees in the sun outside, and you go into the shopping centre and you get Frosty the Snowman and Winter Wonderland. So the writer of this Guardian article was making the point about the contrast between Australian Christmas experience of a stinking hot summer day and various prawn-related crises becomes rather stark at Christmas. So he then lists a series of Christmas songs in descending order of how baffling he finds them, and therefore he considers that to be baffling to anybody else. And here is his list. 5 baffling Aussie Christmas songs, and there they are listed in descending order. The 12 Days of Aussie Christmas, as Aussie Jingle Bells, Carol of the Birds, Three Drovers, and How to Make Gravy by Paul Kelly. I won't say anything about that. It's actually a rather depressing song about a man in jail missing his family and wanting them to make sure they know how to make the gravy. But I will talk about the others because they do have some relevance to real Christmas. And so let's have a look at these. All right, 12 Days of Aussie Christmas. Well, you know the 12 Days of Christmas. On the first day of Christmas, my true love sent to me a string of extraordinary gifts. So here they have been substituted with various Australian wildlife. So we have 12 possums, we have lizards, wombats, crocs, dingoes, emus. There's a bird. Yes, the author of this article has a thing about birds, and sharks. And then we go to the last 5, and sure enough, we do get to some kangaroos. But then we have 4 lyrebirds, 3 wet galahs, 2 snakes on skis, and a kookaburra up a gum tree. That at least does scan into the music. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with those particular birds, here they are. The lyrebird literally is named after the musical instrument, the lyre. It has these rather extraordinary tail feathers, and if you look at them at the right angle, which in this old print of a lyrebird shows you, it does actually look like a traditional ancient lyre. Now, galahs are similar to a cockatoo. They're a type of parrot. Someone in Australia may call you a galah. If they do, I'm sorry, it's not a compliment, in spite of the fact that they are rather a pretty bird. But they have a reputation for being noisy and stupid. Mind you, recent scientific research has shown that parrots, all the different types of parrots, are extremely intelligent, and in fact to call someone a bird brain should no longer be considered to be an insult. Birds do have a small brain. It's just differently wired to the way a mammal brain and a human brain works. Right, so let's move on to Aussie jingle bells. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. And this is sung to the traditional tune. These lyrics were made up by one Colin Buchanan. Some of you may be familiar with him because he writes a lot of Christian songs as well. Particularly for kids, they're good fun songs. So jingle bells, etc., jingle all the way. Christmas in Australia on a scorching summer's day. Jingle bells, Christmas time is beaut. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a rusty Holden ute. All right, a little bit of translation there. Beaut and ute. All right, beaut is short for beautiful. So if something is beaut, it's good. A ute is a type of utility vehicle, basically a motorized workhorse for farmers and rural tradesmen. And they're usually a bit more battered and dusty and sometimes rusty than this particular example. So here is an example of a genuine beaut ute. Right? This was on display at the display of spring flowers that we have in Canberra every year. Quite a few years ago, they had a bit of a theme of Aussie icons. And the ute is considered to be a particular Aussie icon. So just to show that I'm not making up, that sign that they've got stuck on the side there, notice it says, please keep off the ute. Now, all the Australians visiting Floriade would have known what that meant. The Japanese tourists probably were completely flummoxed, but I'm sure they still enjoyed all the flowers. So let's move on. Carol of the Birds. Now, this is one of these rather quaint sort of Australian Christmas carols that you don't hear very much anymore. And in fact, it was published in 1948, but it is one that I remember singing in the school choir. And it used to be it used to be played on the radio. Right, out on the plain, the brolgers are dancing, lifting their feet like war horses prancing. Doesn't sound particularly Christmassy, and in fact, the Guardian writer said that I've no idea what a brolger is, but they sound awfully scary. Up in the sun, the woodlarks go winging, faint in the dawn like echoes. They're singing Arana, Arana, Arana to Christmas Day. Now, the term Arana is usually presented as, oh, this must be an Aboriginal word. Maybe it means welcome. However, that is disputed, and I was unable to find a real definitive origin for that word. So we'll skip over that. But if you are wondering what a brolger is, it is a large water bird with long legs and a very long beak. But it's not scary. It's actually quite a beautiful bird. And it has a reputation for flapping its wings and moving about in a sort of dancing-like movement, which is probably a courtship display. Now, the three drovers, this is about three drovers are sort of, well, they're the same as what they are in Europe and England, of course. People who drive cattle or sheep or animals. And of course, you can drive them very long ways in Australia. So before the time of motorised transport, drovers would spend weeks and months out in the countryside taking flocks and herds. So this is another of these 1948 ones. Across the plains one Christmas night, three drovers riding blithe and gay. Now, we have to remember that word gay used to mean just happy. Now, what about blithe? All right, that also means happy or free of anxiety. So three drovers riding blithe and gay looked up and saw a starry light more radiant than the Milky Way, and on their hearts such wonder fell, they sang with joy, Noel, 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 etc. And the Guardian writer said, this is particularly baffling, this one, because to me it sounds like it's about three men who looked up and saw a UFO. And this is just the first verse, but the other three verses are no more clear that it's actually about Christmas. That it's just about a starry host or a light in the sky. As I said, I won't talk about the last one. So that was number 2. I won't talk about number 1. But it does make you think, well, are there any Australian Christmas carols or Christmas songs that actually mention Christ? Well, there is one of those 1948 ones. And I particularly remember singing this one in the school choir. All the bells are gaily ringing. Again, we have that word. Birds, yes, lots of birds. Birds in every tree are singing. Let us in the golden weather gather Christmas bush together. And what I remember as being Christmas bush, and it is this particular plant. It's called New South Wales Christmas bush. And if Craig was here, he would be objecting and saying, well, there is actually a Tasmanian Christmas bush, and it's a different species, and it actually has white and creamy flowers. And there's also a Victorian Christmas bush. So there's all sorts of plants that are called Christmas bush. And that was part of the usual Christmas ritual. If you had one of these things growing, it flowers in summer, so it does flower around Christmas time, and because it has red flowers and green leaves, it sort of fits in the traditional Christmas colours. And I remember if anyone had one of these growing in their garden, neighbours who didn't would come and ask you, oh, could I have a piece of Christmas bush to put on my Christmas table? Quite a very pretty bush, actually. Going back to the rest of the Christmas song, we finally have a mention of Christ. Christ is born, the angels thunder through the heavens their tale of wonder, while we pick for his adorning Christmas bush this hallowed morning. Next verse. Christ has conquered evil's power. Hear the bells rock every tower. So we've gone beyond the cute story of just a baby being born in amongst animals and lying in a manger, even though we do mention birds and beasts lift up their voices. Freed at last, the world rejoices. A bit of serious theology here, a bit of serious presentation of who Christ is. We have to go beyond the baby in the manger, and John will have a lot more to say about this later on. But when I saw that verse, I thought, yes, that reminds me of some things that we read about Jesus in the Bible that do go beyond the story of the baby in the manger to the bigger picture of who Christ is. Christ the Creator, Christ the Son of God, who appeared to destroy the works of the devil. And of course, how did he do that? By dying on the cross and by rising again. And he came to freed at last, the world rejoices, is a wonderful reminder that the whole of creation will one day be set free. And we have this reminder from the Apostle Paul in Romans, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it. So Christ is judge, in the hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. So our salvation is not just isolated from the rest of creation, the whole of creation is going to be renewed. And it also reminded me of one of my favourite Christmas carols, a classic Isaac Watts one, which is based on Psalm 98, which is also a personal favourite of mine amongst the Psalms. Joy to the world, the Lord is come, let earth receive her King, right? Christ the coming King. Let every heart prepare him room, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. And it goes on to remind us of the bigger picture of Christ. Christ the Creator, Christ the Judge, Christ the Saviour, for whom we have to, in our hearts, put our faith in him. And one day heaven and nature will sing, because there will be no corruption in that new heavens and new earth where the curse has been completely done away with. And there's Christ will reign, and we will be free from the effects of sin. So if we can come back to us, and if John and Joseph, you have any comments to add to this. If anyone has any questions about Australian Christmas songs, I'm happy to answer them.
Diane, I'm just really proud that we got one nice biblical song there that's more accurate than George Whitfield's one, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, because our angels are thundering. And it's interesting, yes. George Whitfield's is singing because it rhymes with king. But in reality, the Bible says, Luke's gospel says, the angels said. There's no reference to angels singing at all. And so that's the point I was making about that church I was at on Sunday. Loves what we do, and yet their basic Christmas picture, something was wrong with it. They had the wise men there with the little baby Jesus in the manger. And we have Christmas carols and from famous biblical preachers that adopt the popular, the angels were singing, when the Bible doesn't say anything of the sort. So don't be surprised at creation research. We sort of get a bit of a reputation for saying, well, you said, but the Bible says, right? And that's one of the jobs God has given us. So perhaps, Joe, can you tell us the meaning of the word carol?
So you're...
Can you hear me?
I missed that last bit, sorry.
You mean you were sleeping again in the cold there because people haven't donated enough to warm up the building? That's correct, right?
Is anybody else? Is John's audio coming through for everybody else?
Yeah, I can hear him. He's fine.
Good.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear all of you. Yes.
I'll ask you, Sam, since you can hear me for sure. What's the meaning of the word carol? Diane used it over and over again. Old Holden Utes in a carol. What do you think the word carol means?
Oh, Carol, that's the lady that lives down the street, isn't it?
Well, actually, she wouldn't have lived down the street to you before the 1920s because Carol was almost unknown as a female name. It applied only to men. So don't be surprised that our rep in the USA is called Carol Carmen. And of course, that struck me as odd because in Australia, none of the men were called Carol. If your name was Carol, you wore a dress. And if you didn't, you were sort of a little misnamed thing. But Carol used to be a male name. Do you know what its use means when we talk about singing?
I've always known it as just meaning man or husband.
Yes, it does. But in reality, what you'll find is the word carol is the same as corralling creatures or going round in a circle, right? So these were songs and they existed before Christmas carols, right? And the first Christmas carol, as far as I recollect, was actually something out of the book of Genesis that contained a promise about a coming king. But carol was a song that you sang and went round and round, and particularly you danced. And you danced in a circle, which is pretty famous amongst the tribal saints in Scotland and England and all the old circular dances. And it was a chorale or a carol. And of course, those Aussie carols would be pretty hard to dance to with some of the flinging kangaroos and jumbuckoos and six white boomers and all those sort of things. And I'm with you, Diane. When I go into a supermarket and I hear Bing Crosby singing Snow White Christmas, you know, what we want for Christmas is a snow white Christmas, and it's 95 degrees in the shade. Again, I'll remind you, we've had many Christmases in Australia that really have been snow white, but they're all down south in the snowy mountains, and it's snowing in some parts of Tasmania, and you can have a white Christmas down there, but not up here. But we also have something unique. We have black Christmases because we've got a few through history where the fires have been so burning, it was like a judgment from hell, and it really was a serious issue because in most places in Australia, the middle of December is their hottest and sometimes their driest, and that's a fatal combination. Okay, so we look at the songs here, and I'm going to hold up a Aussie icon. Joe, you're a bit of a tree man. What is this green monster?
He's from the Norfolk pines, which are part of the southern conifer family.
Yeah, it's true. It's a Norfolk Island pine, and of course, Norfolk Island is rather notorious in history because it became a terrible penal settlement. If you were sent to Norfolk, you probably weren't going to come back. They even had one convict rebellion there, and for the convicts to rebel on an island that was surrounded by sharks where they couldn't escape anyway, they were really, really desperate. But the Norfolk Island pine comes from there, and the reason I'm bringing it up is I was showing to Joe before one of the articles again from The Guardian. Can you all see that? You might want to take me on the whole screen here, Sam. Can you do that? There we are. So obviously The Guardian does a good bit of promotional business through creation research. Diane referred to it on our totally comprehensible hymns. And this one here is all about Australian Christmas trees. And the reason I've got this is out here we have the salespeople promoting, don't borrow those British trees. Don't get the normal pine trees that they use in the forestry. Get some dinkum Australian trees. And it's all about the Araucarias. Now, I bought in a fossil Araucaria, right? Here's one here. This is from our Jurassic Ark deposits, which are extensive in Australia. And they are saying, get a native potentially from the Araucaria family. And Joe, you've been here. We have lots of Araucarias living and dead, correct?
Mm-hmm. You do indeed. All over the world, in fact, the dead ones.
Okay, now I'm going to go and share my PowerPoint. So remind me what we do, because my grandson Ben isn't here to run the system behind me.
Just before we do that, Sam, why don't you give us a couple of thank yous and a reminder of the project we're now working on, because you have to disappear very shortly, I believe.
Yes, I do. If John was going to ensure his PowerPoint was going on, I was going to take it off and make sure that we've got some more donations in. Okay, so we have already some thank yous to give out. We've got Jim P coming in with $2.99 Aussie Buckaroos, a red down arrow with the vertical words here. I'm assuming he's talking about the subscribe button, as I was talking about in the chat. So make sure you smack that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay up to date with all of our uploads and live streams. And we've also got a super sticker from Doki Doki with 3 US Buckaroos, a Shiba dog raising an arm to greet someone asking, how's it going? And George Bond has come in with 10 Aussie Buckaroos. No, Diane, a Ute is an Australian sports car, apparently. I don't know. I don't know my cars enough. I'm not Jeremy Clarkson. But we'll there's 1 or 2 questions in that I've saved, so you guys can come back to that. But quickly, I do beg your pardon. I need to go full screen and talk about the up and coming website and app. Yes, that's right. We have a brand new Creation Research app and website coming. This is in the early stages of development. It's going to be a huge improvement on the current bits and pieces that we have scattered around different websites. So if you haven't heard of it, if you're new, the brand new app is the best new way to consume all the amazing content for Creation Research, with features like a built-in live chat and live stream. So it's even easier to tune into any live content from Creation Research. Plus, there's also an easy-to-use donation button, so you can support the ministry while you watch. And the ministry will also get a brand new website. It's due a makeover. Let's be honest, and it'll make it far easier to find all the articles and content you need. No more juggling multiple websites to find what you're looking for. It's all going to be in one place. And on the app, we're going to have all of our documentaries, and we'll have a subscription model similar to Netflix or Amazon Prime Video, if you ever use those. Low payment every month, and you can get a regular cycle through of content. So, but unfortunately, it's not cheap. These projects are expensive. They cost a lot of money, but they're very important. They're important to the ministry and to furthering the work of spreading the gospel over everything. So please make sure you get your donations in. It is the season of giving, after all, if I may be coy. But make sure you get your donations in. Help speed up the project. Help get this off the ground. And I will stop blabbering now, and I'll come off full screen. Apologies for the plug, but there you go.
That's all right. Okay, so guide me through this again, guys. Yeah. My grandson Techno is not here. I press
You go down to the PowerPoint, the orange PowerPoint button, click on that, select your full screen presentation, and just start scrolling through.
Good. Okay. There, there's our combination website logo, ministry logo, courtesy of Sam and Joe and our artist out here. And I really love that design. And remember the whole point we've made? And as you are studying Christmas with us, one of the points we'll make is that Christmas actually begins in Genesis chapter 1 with the creation of the stars, with the creation of the day that the Lord has made that we'll rejoice in. But more of that later. Joe and I have been talking about Norfolk Island pines. We've also been talking about how even The Guardian publishes an article about Aussie natives. And that leads on to another article about don't use the pines from Europe, use some Australian pine trees. Well, ours are southern conifers. Here we are at Jurassic Ark. And in fact, as you keep going, you can see the fossil one in front of you, standing right up in the middle. We've had that one there since those trees were just planted from pots. But look how big they've grown. Now, these are all oricarias in most case, and they are rapid growing. I mean, this was back in 2010, these trees were pot size. You can see we've got several native sorts of trees there, like we've got the cycads, which you find as fossils in Germany. We've got the little brown pines and the oricarias standing very cone-shaped up the top there. And look, that's beautiful. The trouble is, of course, a 45-foot, a 15-meter pine tree in your Christmas lounge doesn't really fit. So you actually sort of go and buy a potted plant and use it for the first year or so, and then it's through the roof. Many of these, of course, have spiky leaves. So our Norfolk Island pine and that are pretty to look at. In fact, as someone suggested, if you want them the right color, get out a can of spray paint and spray them. They may not last more than a year or so if you do that, because the actual spray will block all their leaf functions after a while and block the sunlight getting into them. But we have another brand of native tree, Calitris, rather smaller and bushy, and lots of room for Christmas lights on it. And Craig and I were talking about this because he's a forestry man. And I said, well, do you have Calitris